Nobody in that sunlit dining room expected the housekeeper to speak. But when Priscilla Wentworth opened her mouth and said what she said about the woman's dead husband, everything in that house shifted, quietly, permanently, and without mercy. The morning had started the way most mornings started at Thornfield House. Linnea Garland arrived before 7, the way she always did, letting herself in through the side entrance with the key Oliver had given her 3 years ago. She hung her coat on the hook near the mudroom door, tied her apron, and moved through the kitchen without turning on the overhead light. She knew the kitchen by touch now. Where the coffee filters lived, which burner ran hot, which drawer stuck when the weather was damp. Oliver Wentworth had hired her 6 weeks after his wife died. His daughter-in-law Priscilla had not been consulted. Linnea understood that from the first day. She understood it the way a person understands weather. Not from being told, but from feeling the change in the air. Whenever Priscilla walked into a room where Linnea was already standing. It was a Thursday in late October when everything broke open. Oliver's son Rowan Wentworth had come home from Calgary for the weekend. He did not come often. His company kept him moving, and Thornfield House, with its high ceilings and long silences, had never been the kind of place Rowan seemed comfortable staying in for long. But this visit was different. Oliver had turned 72 the week before, and Rowan had promised his father a proper celebration, a family lunch, champagne and a cake from the French bakery on Elgin Street. Priscilla had organized everything. That was what Priscilla did. She organized things and then stood very close to them so everyone understood who they belonged to. The caterers had come and gone by noon. The long table in the dining room had been set with the good china, the ivory set with the gold rim that Oliver's wife Margaret had brought from England 40 years ago. Priscilla had laid it herself, not because she enjoyed the work, but because she wanted to be the one who decided where each plate sat. Linnea had stayed near the kitchen, refilling water glasses, keeping the serving platters warm, moving quietly between the table and the door the way she always moved in this house, invisible when Priscilla needed her to be, present when Oliver needed her to be. The guests were mostly family. Oliver's sister Dorothy had driven in from Brockville with her husband, a cousin and his wife from Ottawa. Rowan's 2 daughters from his first marriage, Ivy and Cora, sat near their grandfather with the relaxed ease of girls who had grown up in this house on summer weekends. Nobody was paying attention to Linnea. That was how she heard it. She was near the sideboard, lifting the lid on the soup tureen to check the temperature. When Priscilla said something to Dorothy that Linnea was not supposed to hear, Priscilla was leaning slightly toward Dorothy, her voice lowered just enough to feel private without actually being private. The kind of voice that wants to be overheard by the right people, she said. The problem is Oliver still trusts her completely, which is sweet I suppose if you don't think about it too carefully. Dorothy murmured something. She's been going through Margaret's things, Priscilla continued. I found her in the upstairs hall with the cedar's chest open last week. She claimed Oliver asked her to bring some boxes down from storage, but she couldn't tell me what was in them. A pause. I've spoken to Rowan about it. I told him, a woman like that with no family, no history, no one to account to, you don't know what she's looking for. Linnea set the lid down. She did not slam it. She set it carefully with both hands, the way she did everything in this house. Her fingers stayed flat against the pewter handle for a moment, long enough for her to breathe once. Then she turned around. Priscilla did not notice immediately. She was still leaning toward Dorothy, her pearl earring catching the light above the table. Dorothy had stopped murmuring. Her eyes had drifted toward Linnea, just barely, the way eyes do when a person senses something has changed in a room. Rowan was speaking to the Ottawa cousin about interest rates. Ivy and Cora were talking over each other about something that had happened at school. Oliver was watching all of it with the quiet pleasure of a man who was happy simply to have people around him. Nobody spoke. Linnea walked to the table. She did not walk to the kitchen. She did not walk to the door. She walked the 6 steps to the table and stood at the corner nearest Priscilla, and she waited. Priscilla turned. For a brief moment something crossed her face. A flicker of recalculation quickly covered. Then she smiled. Linnea, can we get more bread please? In a moment, Linnea said. The table slowed. Not all at once. Conversations didn't stop. They drifted, thinned, trailed off the way music does when a room goes quiet enough to hear the silence underneath. I heard what you said, Linnea told her. Priscilla's smile held. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. You said I was going through Mrs. Wentworth's things. You said I couldn't tell you what was in the boxes. Linnea kept her voice even, not low, not loud, a voice for a room. You were right that I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you because Oliver asked me to keep it between us, and I keep the things people ask me to keep. Priscilla set her fork down. The sound of it against the china plate was very small and very clear. Linnea, she said, and the name came out with a layer of patience over it, the kind of patience people perform when they want an audience to see how much they're holding back. This really isn't the time. I think it is, Linnea said. Because you said it now, in front of everyone. The Ottawa cousin had stopped talking about interest rates. Dorothy's husband was looking at his napkin. Ivy, who was 16 and too old to pretend she wasn't paying attention, was watching Linnea with wide, steady eyes. Oliver, at the head of the table, had gone very still. Priscilla glanced at him. Then she looked back at Linnea and decided to try a different door. Her voice dropped into something more intimate, more conspiratorial. I only said what Rowan and I have talked about privately. I'm sorry if you overheard. It wasn't meant to be cruel. The question sat in the air. Priscilla picked up her fork again. Protective. We are protective of Oliver. Surely you understand that. I understand you said I have no history, Linnea said, and no one to account to. The table was very quiet now. Even the girls had stopped. Oliver spoke for the first time. His voice came from the head of the table, low and steady. Priscilla. Priscilla turned toward him. Oliver, I only let her finish. Those 3 words changed the temperature of the room. Priscilla heard it, everyone heard it. She set her fork down again, more carefully this time. Linnea looked at Oliver. He was watching her the way he'd watched her the first day she came for the interview, 3 years ago. With that particular stillness he had. The stillness of a man who had spent a lifetime listening to things that were said around him rather than to him. I do have a history, Linnea said. She wasn't performing it. She wasn't building toward anything. She was just saying it plainly. I have 31 years of history in this city. I raised 2 children in a 1-bedroom apartment on Carling Avenue after my husband left. I worked nights at the hotel on Rideau Street for 6 years. I took care of my mother in her last year without anyone helping me do it. She paused. I came to work here because Oliver needed someone, and because I needed the work, and those 2 things fit together honestly. Priscilla exhaled. It was barely a sound, but everyone in the room heard it. That's a very moving story. It's not a story, Linnea said. It's just what happened. Something shifted at the far end of the table. Ivy looked down. Cora pressed her lips together. Dorothy had stopped pretending to arrange her bread roll and was simply watching, both hands flat on the table. Priscilla tried once more. She had the kind of face that could reassemble itself very quickly, and she was reassembling it now, pulling warmth into the corners of her eyes. Linnea, I think you've misunderstood what this lunch is about. It's a family occasion. I think it would be better for everyone if we... I have not misunderstood anything, Linnea said. It was quiet again. You have spent 3 years misunderstanding me, she continued. You checked my references without telling Oliver. You questioned the night nurses about what I said when I stayed late. You called the agency that placed me and asked whether I had ever worked for estates before. She watched Priscilla's face go flat. I know because the woman at the agency told me. She thought I should know. Rowan had gone completely still. Priscilla opened her mouth. You're right that I was in the upstairs hall, Linnea said. Oliver asked me to bring down the cedar chest, and I did. And I will tell you what was in it, because Oliver asked me to keep it between us until today, and I believe today is when he meant. Every head at the table turned slowly toward the head of the table. Oliver Wentworth set his champagne glass down. His hands were steady. He was 72 years old, and he was looking at Linnea the way she imagined a person looked at someone who had kept their word. Go ahead, he said quietly. Linnea looked at the table. At Rowan, at Ivy and Cora, at Dorothy and her husband. The cedar chest had Margaret's personal papers in it, she said. Letters, legal documents, and a folder that Oliver asked me to hold for him until he was ready to share it. She looked at Rowan directly. It concerns you. Rowan blinked. There are documents in it that Margaret kept for 30 years, Linnea said. She kept them because she believed they should go to you when the time was right. Oliver said the time was right on his birthday. He asked me to bring the folder down that day so he could give it to you today. She looked at Priscilla. That is what I was doing in the upstairs hall. The room absorbed this slowly, the way a dry cloth absorbs water. Not all at once but completely. Priscilla's mouth was a thin flat line. Dorothy said softly, Margaret kept letters? Oliver nodded once. There are things Margaret wanted Rowan to understand about where this family came from. Things she chose not to say while she was alive. He looked at his hands. She wasn't ready, and then she ran out of time to get ready. Rowan leaned forward slightly. His voice when it came was careful. Dad, what kind of documents? Oliver was quiet for a moment. The house settled around them. The small sounds of it, the furnace, the wind at the window. The familiar creaking of the floors that had spoken this way since long before any of them were inside it. Your grandfather didn't build Thornfield the way the family has always told it, Oliver said finally. Your grandmother was not his first wife. There was a woman before her, a woman from Halifax, who was part of everything that was built here. He stopped. She left. The family let it be said that she was gone for her own reasons. She wasn't. Rowan sat back. Priscilla looked between them. Oliver, I don't understand what this has to do with. Margaret spent 20 years quietly finding out what happened to her, Oliver said. He was speaking only to Rowan now. She found a son. The table was absolutely silent. A son, Rowan repeated. His name is Hugh. He's in his late 60s. He lives in Halifax still, near where his mother did. Oliver's voice was steady, but his hands had tightened around the champagne glass. Margaret wrote him. They exchanged letters for 8 years. She never told me while she was alive because she was afraid of how I would handle it. He looked at his hands. She may have been right. Rowan stared at him. I have an uncle, you have an uncle. Something moved across the table between them, not something older and heavier than words. Priscilla had found her voice again. She used it carefully, precisely, the way a person uses a tool they've handled for years and trust to work. Oliver, this is, I don't want to diminish what Margaret did, but a letter exchange with a stranger in Halifax doesn't establish a family relationship. There are legal questions. There are inheritance questions. She glanced around the table briefly, collecting witness. Rowan, you have to think about what this means for the family. Rowan did not look at her. He was still looking at his father. Is he in the folder? Rowan asked. Oliver nodded. His address, his phone number. A photograph Margaret kept from a visit she made without telling me. In 2016 he paused. She drove to Halifax alone in February. She said she was visiting a friend from university. I didn't ask further because she seemed happy when she came home. His voice caught, just once barely. She seemed happier than she'd been in a long time. Cora, who was 13 and had been sitting rigid since Linnea spoke, reached over and put her hand on her grandfather's arm without saying anything. Oliver looked down at her hand, then at her, and the hardness around his eyes softened. Priscilla pressed on. I hear what you're saying, and I know Margaret's intentions were good, but the timing of this. The timing is not an accident, Oliver said, and it was the first time all day his voice carried an edge. I asked Linnea to bring the box down. I chose today, my birthday. With my family here. He looked across the table at his daughter-in-law. All of my family. Priscilla's chin lifted. Oliver continued. I asked Linnea to keep it safe because I wasn't sure how I would feel when the moment came, and she did. She kept it safe for 8 days without once asking me about it or suggesting she knew better than I did about when the moment should be. He looked at Linnea. That is not nothing. The word landed quietly. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Linnea, who had been standing through all of it, reached to the small side table near the window where she had placed the folder that morning before the guests arrived. She carried it to Oliver. She set it in front of him without ceremony. Oliver put both hands on it and held it still. Priscilla said his name one more time, quickly. Oliver, Priscilla. Rowan's voice was not raised. It was not unkind. But it was final. He was looking at her and his face had the expression of someone who had been on the edge of something for a long time and had just found solid ground. Let it be. She looked at him. He held her gaze. After a moment, Priscilla Wentworth looked away. She reached for her water glass and took a careful sip and said nothing more. At the head of the table, Oliver opened the folder. The first page was a letter in Margaret's handwriting. The same handwriting Linnea had seen on recipe cards pinned above the kitchen windowsill. On birthday notes tucked into books on the library shelf. On the small framed card that hung near the back door that said simply, "Be patient with each other." But here the handwriting was different. Not different in form but in weight. The letters pressed harder into the paper. They were the letters of a woman writing something she had needed to write for a long time. Rowan leaned forward. Oliver turned the folder so his son could see. Linnea stepped back from the table, not away from the room, not out of it. She moved to her place near the sideboard and stood there with her hands folded in front of her, the way she stood when the family needed space to be family without the awareness of someone watching. She watched anyway. She could not help it. Ivy looked up from the letter and caught Linnea's eye. The girl's face was open in the way young faces are open when they've just witnessed something they don't have words for yet. She held Linnea's gaze for a moment, then she gave a very small nod. Linnea nodded back. The lunch was not finished. The bread had gone slightly cold, and the soup was thicker than she'd have liked, and someone would want more coffee before long. There were still things to do, plates to carry, a cake still boxed in the kitchen, champagne still chilling for a birthday toast. That would mean something different now than it had this morning. But the room had changed. The way rooms change, not when things are fixed, but when they stop pretending they aren't broken. Priscilla sat very still at her end of the table. She was not weeping, she was not performing. She was simply sitting, her hands in her lap, her face arranged carefully, looking at the table in front of her, with the expression of a woman recalculating something she had believed was settled. Linnea understood that calculation. She had made it herself a long time ago, in a one-bedroom apartment on Carling Avenue after the man she had married, finished packing a single bag and walked out the door without explaining. That night she had sat at the kitchen table with 2 sleeping children in the next room, and thought very carefully about what she was willing to carry, and what she was not. She was not willing to carry someone else's cruelty, and call it part of the job. She never had been. She had been quiet about it for 3 years, because quiet was sometimes the most powerful thing a person could be, but quiet was not the same as absent. She had always been there, she had always seen. Oliver looked up from the folder. His eyes found her. "Linnea," he said. She waited. "Thank you," 2 words. She had heard "thank you" in this house before. From Oliver after she stayed late when he had a bad winter chest and couldn't manage the stairs. From Cora, age 10, when Linnea found her lost library book behind the radiator in the reading room. From Ivy the summer before, when Linnea had covered for her about a dent in the garden gate and said nothing about how it got there. But this was different. This was the kind of thank you that meant, I saw you stand there, I saw what it cost you. And I need you to know I know what you did. Of course, she said. She went to the kitchen to warm the bread. Behind her she heard Oliver begin to speak to Rowan quietly, about a man in Halifax named Hugh, and what it might mean to call him, and whether February was too long to wait. She filled the bread basket and did not hear what Rowan answered. But she heard his voice, and it sounded like someone who had stopped protecting himself from something that was only ever going to be good. The dining room held that sound for a long time after. Later, after the guests had gone and Rowan and Priscilla had retreated upstairs. Not arguing, not speaking, just retreating. Oliver sat alone at the dining room table with his coffee and the open folder in front of him, turning the pages one at a time. Linnea was clearing the last of the glasses. She wrote him 43 letters, Oliver said without looking up. Linnea stopped. I counted them just now. He touched the edge of a page. 8 years. She kept every reply he sent. He was quiet. I did not know my wife was carrying this. She carried it carefully, Linnea said, so it wouldn't fall on you. Oliver looked up. Linnea held his gaze. That's what some people do with the things they love. They carry them until they can set them down somewhere safe. The room was very quiet. Oliver looked back at the folder. He closed it gently and placed both hands on the cover, the same way Linnea had seen him place both hands on things that mattered. The back of a chair when his knees were bad, the railing at the top of the stairs, the photograph of Margaret on the hall table that he straightened every morning without realizing he was doing it. Will you lock the folder in the study when you're done here? He asked. I'll want it in the morning. Yes, she said. She finished clearing the glasses. She took the folder to the study and locked it in the top drawer of the old oak desk that had been in the house since Oliver's father sat behind it. On her way back through the hall, she paused by the photograph of Margaret Wentworth. She had looked at it 100 times. A woman in her 40s, caught somewhere outdoors, laughing at something out of frame. There was something in the photograph that Linnea had never been able to name exactly. A quality of the face, the way the eyes were both looking at the camera and looking somewhere past it. She understood it now. Margaret had known something was unfinished. She had carried it the way a person carries a letter they haven't sent yet, keeping it close because they aren't ready to let it go, but not ready to destroy it either. Linnea straightened the photograph the way Oliver did, from long habit, with 2 careful fingers at the corner. Then she went to get her coat from the hook near the mudroom door. On the chair beside it, folded neatly, was her apron. Priscilla Wentworth had left it there. It had been taken from the hook where Linnea always hung it and placed on the chair instead, deliberately, the way certain gestures are made deliberately to be felt. Linnea picked it up. She folded it once more neatly than it had been, and hung it back on the hook. She put on her coat. She let herself out through the side entrance and walked to her car in the cold October air. The street was orange with leaves. A neighbor's dog was barking at something invisible in the hedge. She sat in the car for a moment before starting the engine. She thought about Hugh, in Halifax, not knowing yet that someone from Ontario was about to call him. She thought about 43 letters, 8 years, a woman driving to the coast in February with something she had kept too long. She thought about Ivy's small nod across the table. She thought about 2 words. Thank you. She started the car. She had told the truth, and it had cost her nothing she wasn't already prepared to lose. And it had given the room something back that it had needed for a long time. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough.